I wrote this world, 47 characters, 5 noble houses, 200,000 words of court intrigue that paid me enough to keep my heating on for one winter. I know every secret in this room because I typed them. I know who poisoned whose father. I know which lord's son isn't his, and I know exactly how this book ends, because I ended it, badly, at 2 in the morning, with a deadline breathing on my neck. Then I woke up inside it, not as the hero, not as the villain. As Soren Kai, House Dusk, a side character so minor I cut him in chapter 3 of the draft and never thought about him again. That's who I am now. The guy I deleted. And on my very first day, a woman I never finished writing stood up in front of 5 noble houses, read my life out loud like a shopping list, and got a line right that I burned before publication. Let's start there. The Hall of Names, first evening of the season. Every house sends its new blood to be introduced, which in practice means the nobility gets 1 hour of legally permitted bullying. They call it a ceremony. It's a roast with better chairs. I was standing at the end of the line holding my nameplate, doing the thing you do when you're 47th on a list of 47 being furniture. My plate said Soren Kai, Ward of House Dusk. Ward. That's court language for we feed him and we'd like credit for it. Then Lenora Vale walked down the line. I'd written her. Sort of. She was the villainess of my book. The one who ruins the heroine's life for 6 chapters and then gets exiled off page, and her introduction chapter got cut by my editor for pacing. Which meant that in the published text, Lenora Vale had no interior, no history, no lines except the cruel ones. In person, she was worse than I wrote her. She moved like the floor had been laid specifically for her that morning, and she was inspecting the work. Black gloves, 1 ring, and an expression that made 2 grown lords find something fascinating on the ceiling. She stopped at me. She took my plate out of my hands. She didn't ask. Soren Kai, she read. Ward of House Dusk. Age 22. No title. No allowance. No entry rights to the family archive. She turned it over like she expected a punchline on the back. No lineage recorded, the hall laughed. Not the cruel roar you'd imagine. Worse. That polite little ripple that means nobody in the room considers you a threat. Fine. I'd written that laugh. I knew what it sounded like before I heard it. Then she added 1 more line. Mother, she said, Sela Kai, died of Ren's fever in the Eastern Quarter. Sold her loom in the 3rd winter to pay a debt she didn't owe. The hall kept laughing. I stopped breathing, because that line does not exist. I wrote it, then I cut it. 3 drafts ago, in a document that lived and died on my laptop in a world with electricity and instant noodles. Sela Kai's loom was never published. It isn't in the book, it isn't in the appendix, it isn't in this world's paper anywhere. Because in this world, that scene never happened. She died. The loom is a detail I invented and deleted. And I am the only living thing in any universe who knows about it. And a villainess I never finished writing just read it out loud like it was on the plate. There was 1 second one, where something hot went up the back of my neck, and my hands wanted to do something extremely stupid. I let it pass. Anger is a status report. It tells the room exactly how much you have left. So I looked up at her, and I said in the flattest voice I own, beautiful file. Especially the last line. Her chin lifted a fraction. I cut that one, I said. And I watched Lenora Vale, the woman who had, 20 seconds earlier, been running this hall like a personal kennel, go absolutely still. Not scared, not caught. Something else. Something that looked for half a heartbeat like relief, which made no sense at all and which I filed away for later, in the drawer marked things that are about to ruin my week. Then she smiled, and the temperature came back up, and she hung my nameplate on her own belt like a hunting trophy. 7 days, she said, loud enough for the back rows. House Vale wagers in 7 days. This one crawls to me and begs for his name back. The hall exploded, actual shouting, lords calling out stakes across the floor like it was a racetrack. Because it was, the fun part of court isn't the cruelty, it's the betting. Somebody wagered a hunting lodge. Somebody wagered a daughter's dowry, which tells you everything about the Eastern houses. And me? I bowed. Shallow. Correct. The exact depth a ward owes a veil because I wrote the etiquette chapter and I know it to the inch. 7 days, I agreed. Then I walked out. Here's my internal state at that moment. For the record, my legs were fine, my face was fine, and inside my head a small man was running in circles, screaming, because I knew what day 7 was. Everybody in that hall thought Lenora Vale had just invented a game. I knew she'd set her clock to my execution. Out in the corridor, I did the only thing I could think of to check I hadn't gone insane. I stopped by the north doors and said, out loud, to nobody, Lord Morton walks in first. He's angry about the wine. He says they've watered the Ballon red again, and then he laughs at his own joke, and nobody else does. The doors opened. Lord Morton walked in first. "They've watered the ballon red again," he said and laughed, and nobody else did. I let out a breath. Okay, so I still have it. The edge isn't magic. Nobody gave me a system. I don't have a floating panel. I can't shoot lightning out of my hands, which frankly I resent. Because if I'd known I was going to end up in here, I would have written myself something better than sarcasm. What I have is this. I wrote the book. Every scene of it lives in my head like a page I can turn. I know what's coming because I decided what was coming. I am not a prophet. I'm the author reading his own manuscript. That night in my room, and room is generous, it's a converted linen store next to the laundry. It smells like wet wool and it has a window the size of a serving tray. I turned to Chapter 7. Chapter 7. 7th day of the season. The night of judgment when the 5 houses gather to settle internal matters, which is a nice way of saying it's the night. House Dusk takes out its garbage in public. The text was right there behind my eyes, in my own handwriting, in my own voice, with my own lazy comma splices. Soren Kai is named a thief. The seal of House Dusk is found among his belongings. He is struck from the family ledger and put out the eastern gate. He does not appear in this book again. I wrote that in 11 minutes. I remember because I was hungry, and I wanted to finish the chapter and get food. 11 minutes. That's how long I spent on the death sentence I'm currently living under. Great. Fantastic. 10 out of 10 craft. Soren, 6 days left. Let me introduce my family since they're the ones holding the knife. House Dusk sits at the top of the Eastern Circle. Old land, older debts, a name people still stand up for. Lord Hald Dusk runs it, and Hald isn't evil. I want to be precise about this, because it matters. Hald is worse than evil. Hald is a man who does arithmetic. He'll pick whoever costs him less that morning, and if that's you, wonderful. And if that's not you, he won't even feel bad, because the numbers said so. And then there's my brother, Killian Dusk, adopted at 9, heir presumptive at 19. Protagonist of the book you're currently standing inside. I wrote him as the hero. That's the joke. He's the good one. Handsome, generous, beloved, gives to the poor where the poor can see him. My editor loved him. Readers loved him. 600 comments on Chapter 12, most of them about his jawline. I met him in the courtyard on my way back from the Hall of Names, and he did the thing, right on schedule. Chapter 4, The Cloak. Soren. Big smile. Warm hands on my shoulders. 2 footmen and a stable boy watching, which is the whole point. You're shivering. I wasn't shivering. It was a mild evening. He took off his cloak, gray wool, silver clasp, the kind of thing that costs more than my mother's loom sold for, and he draped it over my shoulders himself, personally, slowly, making sure the staff got a good long look at the young master of House Dusk clothing his poor ward with his own hands. There, he said. Better much, I said. You're very kind. Family, he said, and squeezed my shoulder, and walked off into the light with his hair doing the thing his hair does. The stable boy actually sighed. Here's what nobody in that courtyard knew. I wrote that cloak. It's a plant. On the night of judgment, this exact cloak comes back as evidence Killian's own cloak. Found in the ward's room, proof the thief helped himself to the young master's things while the young master was being kind to him. Chapter 7, paragraph 2. The cloak is on the table when they name me. I set it up in draft. I was proud of it. I thought it was a nice little irony. So I stood in the courtyard wearing my own murder weapon, and I thought, I really was a terrible person to write. Then Mia Rowe found me, because of course she did. Mia Rowe is the heroine of my book. Sweet, gentle, loved by all. Rises from nothing to stand beside Killian at the top of the Eastern Circle, and along the way she sells out every single person who helps her, which is the twist I was extremely pleased with when I was 26. She came at me with the eyes already on, head tilted, hands folded. Soren, she said softly, I'm so sorry about the hall. Lady Vale is cruel to everyone. I hate seeing anyone treated like a stray, I said. She blinked. That you'd never be treated like that in a real house, I went on. But that's not your fault, is it? You just have to survive them too. And if you ever need someone to talk to, Soren, I'm right here because nobody else in this family sees you. Silence. I just recited her next 4 lines, word for word, in her rhythm, with her little breath in the middle, because I wrote that breath in as a stage direction. Mia Rowe's face did something small and quick. She's good. She got it back inside 2 seconds, and the sweetness came down again like a shudder. You're funny, she said. I'm tired, I said. Take the second half tomorrow. It's a good speech. It deserves an audience, she left. She walked normally for 6 steps, which is 5 more than most people manage. Do you know what she did next? Went straight to Killian. She always goes straight to Killian. It's in Chapter 5. She'll tell him the ward knows things a ward shouldn't know, and Killian will smile and say something gracious, and then he'll start moving the schedule up. Good, let him. Because there was one person in that house who called me by my name without wanting anything back. and I needed to find him. Uncle Bart is the archivist of House Dusk. 60-something, back like a question mark. Spends his life in the lower stacks with the ledgers in the dust. In the book, he has no name. He's the old archivist. He has 4 lines, and one of them is, "Yes, my lord. I gave him the name Bart in a draft. Just for me. So I'd stop typing the old archivist. It never made it to the page. He was on his stool when I came down, squinting at a ledger through a lens the size of a soup spoon. "Soren," he said without looking up, "you look like a man who got read out loud." I got read out loud. "Veil girl? Veil girl," he grunted. "She's been strange this season. Came in here on the first day and asked me a question." He turned a page. "Asked which stair the ward uses, not which room. Which stair?" I sat down on the crate that has, for reasons lost to history, been my chair since I got here. "Bart," I said. "What's my name?" He looked up. Lens off. "Eyes actually on me?" "Soren Kai," he said. "Same as it was yesterday. Why? And that's it. That's the whole reason I'd walk into a fire for that old man. Everyone in that house calls me boy, ward, you, hey. He says Soren Kai. He's been saying it since the week I arrived and found his debt papers in the wrong drawer and made them the right drawer, quietly, at 2 in the morning, so he wouldn't lose his post over 11 silver he never owed. 4 lines in the book, 4. Some author I am. That night I ran an experiment. I needed to know the shape of the thing I'm carrying, so I did the smallest possible test. I went into the empty east parlor, and I moved a cup. That's it. A blue cup on the sideboard. In Chapter 6, a maid named Ilse knocks that cup off the sideboard during the morning cleaning, and Killian's aunt scolds her. And that little scene is how the reader learns the aunt is petty. I moved the cup 4 inches left, out of the sweep of a careless elbow. 4 inches. And Chapter 6 went out, not blurred, not fuzzy, out like a room with the lamp taken away. I reached for it, the way I'd reached for Chapter 7 an hour earlier. And where the words had been there was a flat nothing, with my own handwriting torn off the edge of it. I stood in that parlor with my hand on a cup for a long time, because here's the deal I just learned. And it's a filthy one. The manuscript is my sight. Every time I change something, I burn the pages downstream of it. Every move I make, I go a little blinder. If I fight, I lose the map. If I keep the map, I don't fight. I put the cup back where it was. Ilse can take the scolding. I'm sorry, Ilse. I'll pay you back on day 7. Day 1, and Killian went to work. Court doesn't do murder in the dark. Court does paperwork. If you want to erase a man in the Eastern Circle, you need 3 things. A crime, a witness, and a seal. And the seal is the hard one, because House Dusk's seal doesn't leave the ledger room without Lord Hald's signature. So Killian did what he does in Chapter 5. He borrowed it early, for the season's registrations, and then he stood in the long gallery with it in his hand and let the patrons of the house admire him holding it. I know that scene. I wrote that scene. I wrote it because I needed my hero to look like a man the house trusted. I walked into the middle of it. 9 or 10 of them, patrons, 2 of Hald's advisors, Lord Morton of the watered Balan Red, Killian in the center with the seal on his palm, like a bird he'd tamed personally. It's a formality, he was saying. Father simply prefers the registrations be handled by one hand. It saves the clerks a week. Small laughs. Nodding. Which hand did you get it from? I said. The gallery turned around. Killian's smile stayed exactly where it was. That's the frightening thing about him, honestly. It's very well made. Soren, he said warmly. You're up early. Not Father's hand, I said. Lord Morton's 2 nights ago, in the small study after the Balan Red. You asked him to endorse the transfer? And he did it because you promised him the Eastern water rights would come back on the table this season. The gallery stopped being a gallery and became a room with a problem in it. Morton's face went a color I can only describe as boiled, that specific pink of a man who's been caught being useful to someone he shouldn't have been useful to, in front of 6 people whose opinion is his entire life. That's a private arrangement, Morton said. That's my point, I said. It's very private. It's so private that Lord Hald doesn't know his seal moved on a promise about his own water. Silence. 10 seconds of it. You could hear the gallery clock. Killian laughed. Beautiful laugh, honestly. The ward has an imagination. The ward has a date, I said. The 11th. After midnight, Morton's own steward carried the lamp. And here's the thing about court. Nobody actually cares whether I'm right. They care whether I could be, because if I could be, then Morton has been spending House Dusk's authority in a dark room for a jug of wine and a maybe, and every man in that gallery just did the arithmetic on what else Morton might have promised with their names in his mouth. Morton withdrew his endorsement that evening, in writing, with an apology to Lord Hald so groveling it took 2 pages. Which means Killian is now holding a seal that has no legal backing behind it. 6 days before he needs it to strike me out of the ledger, and he'll have to find a second patron, and every patron in the Eastern Circle now knows what happened to the last one who did him a favor. That's a concrete loss. Write it down. Killian Dusk, day 1, -1 patron. Cut to the study an hour later, because I'd love to tell you I imagined this part, but I wrote his inner voice, and I know exactly what it sounds like when it starts to crack. Killian sat with the dead seal in front of him, turning it, setting it down, turning it. Morton's debt was 3 years old and buried under a name that wasn't Morton's. Killian had spent 2 months finding it. 2 months of very careful, very quiet work. The ward has been in this house for 6 years, and in 6 years the ward has never once said a clever thing. How does he know about Morton's debt? He said the date. He said the lamp. He sat there until the candle guttered, and then he wrote a very short note to Mia Rowe, which is not something the hero of my book was supposed to do until chapter 9. I told you. He's moving the schedule up. Good. And Lenora Vale watched the whole thing from the gallery balcony. I didn't know she was up there until I turned to leave. Black gloves on the rail, chin down, watching me the way you watch a horse you've already bought and are now worried about. That's the part that bothered me. She wasn't gloating. She'd just seen me put a lord of the Eastern Circle through a wall in front of witnesses on day 1 of a bet she made in public, and any villainess I've ever written. And I've written her should have been furious, or delighted, or at minimum interested. Lenora Vale looked like a woman checking a list. She came down the stairs. Everyone else in the gallery found urgent business elsewhere, which is the effect she has. Morton, she said. Morton, I agreed. You could have used that later. She said it like a shopkeeper telling you you'd overpaid. Day 5, when it would have cost him more. I opened my mouth to say something insufferable, and then I closed it. Because that line is not in my book. Not a paraphrase, not close, not something Lenora Vale might say. My Lenora Vale doesn't do tactics out loud with a ward in an empty gallery. My Lenora Vale mocks him about his shoes and leaves. I know because I wrote both scenes, and my editor cut one, and I can see the deleted one right now, and it is not this. She was standing off the page. Why day 5? I said carefully. She looked at me for a second too long. Because on day 5 he's frightened, she said, and frightened men sign things. Then she walked away, and my nameplate swung on her belt with every step, and I stood there in an empty gallery with my entire manuscript open in my head, and absolutely no idea what had just happened. That's the first time in this world I couldn't turn the page. Day 2, she started collecting on the bet in public, and I'll give her this. She's thorough. Morning room, full house. She had me brought in, and she pointed at the porcelain service laid out on the long table. The Eastern set, 30 pieces. The one with the gray rim. The ward will wash these, Lenora said. By hand. Here, now. You could feel the room enjoy it, because it's not the washing. Nobody in that room has ever washed anything. They don't understand it as work. They understand it as position, a man of the house in the morning room, at the basin, with an audience. It's a costume. She was dressing me as a servant in front of my own family and asking the family to watch. Lord Hald did the arithmetic and looked out the window. Killian said, Lady Vale, surely, in a tone constructed entirely to be overheard and remembered. Mia Rowe put a hand over her mouth, so I rolled my sleeves and I washed the porcelain. Here's what nobody in that room knew, and what she couldn't have known either. That service was my mother's work. Not hers to own, she painted the gray rim in the Eastern Quarter in a workshop that took the commission from House Dusk 12 years ago and paid her in coppers. 30 pieces, her hand on every one of them. I wrote that. I cut it. So I washed my mother's 30 plates in front of the family who bought them for coppers, and I did it well. Not sullenly, not slowly. I did it like a man who has done it before. Because I have, and when I set the last one down on the cloth, it was cleaner than it had been in a decade, and every rim was facing the same way. That's what actually gets them, by the way. Not defiance, competence, rage they know what to do with. Rage they can point at and say, look, he's an animal. A man who does the humiliation properly, and puts the plates down in a perfect line, that one they don't have a script for. And the room went awkward and quiet, and Lenora Vale's mouth did something that was not a smile, and was not a smile. She turned away, and under her breath, not for the room, not for the record, in a voice I have never once written for her, don't try so hard, just leave. I looked up. She was already walking out. Just leave, not beg, which is what she wagered in front of 5 houses. Not kneel, which is what a villainess is for. Leave, she bet the entire dignity of House Vale in public, with lords writing down the odds on making me walk out of this estate before day 7. And she wasn't enjoying a single second of it. Meanwhile, in the small study, my heroine was doing her job. He knew my words, Mia told Killian. She had the tremble on. She's very good at the tremble. Before I said them. All of them. And Lady Vale won't take her eyes off him, and she stopped smiling. And Killian, people are starting to look at him. Killian was still turning the dead seal over in his fingers. He'd been doing it for 2 days. There was a shine coming up on the wax where his thumb kept going. Looking at him how? Like he might be worth something. And that's the sentence that did it. Not the knowing, not the dates. The looking. Because a man like Killian doesn't actually want the ledger, or the land, or the seal. He wants to be the only lit thing in the room. And for 6 years I was the dark corner that made him brighter. And dark corners are not supposed to develop opinions. The night of judgment is on the 7th, he said. Convenient. You could do it quietly, Mia said. Tonight. Word to Lord Hald, and he's gone by morning. No. Killian set the seal down at last. Very gently. The way you put down something you've decided to use. Quietly is for problems. He isn't a problem, he smiled at her. And I want you to understand that it was a genuinely lovely smile. He's a lesson. Lessons need chairs. That evening, Uncle Bart came to the linen store, looked both ways down the corridor like a man in a much better spy novel, and put a key in my hand. Small, black, cold, lower stacks, he said. The old registry, the one under the new registry. Bart, you found my papers in the wrong drawer, he said, and put them in the right drawer, and never once mentioned it to me or to anyone. And I'm 61 years old, and I've got a name because you use it. He shrugged, and the shrug hurt him, and he did it anyway. Take the key, Soren Kai. 5 days. 5 days until the night I wrote in 11 minutes, where my brother lays a cloak on a table and takes my name off a page. Everybody in that estate thought they knew how this ends. The ward gets struck from the ledger and put out the eastern gate, and the villainess collects her bet, and the hero and the heroine stand together in the light while the servants applaud. Sure, that's how it ends in the book. Here's my problem, though. I don't need to survive the night of judgment. I need them to strike out the right name. The debt came the next morning, because Killian is nothing if not a man who reads the manual. You can't strike a name out of a noble ledger for being annoying. You need a crime. But a crime is loud, and a crime needs a witness, and witnesses have prices, so you start smaller. You start with money. Every erasure in the Eastern Circle begins with a debt, because a debt is the one accusation nobody in this world checks. It just sits there, growing a smell. Chapter 5. A note appears in the ward's name. 1100 silver, borrowed against House Dusk's credit at a lending office in the Eastern Quarter. Dated a year back, signed with an X because a ward can't sign for the house. It's a good forgery. I know exactly how good, because I invented it in a coffee shop. So at 7 in the morning, I walked into the treasury office of House Dusk, which is a stone room with 3 clerks and a man named Ovid Trask, who has the personality of a locked drawer. And I put a piece of paper on his desk before anyone had accused me of anything. Good morning, I said. That's the 1100 note from Vane & Sons in the Eastern Quarter. It's closed, paid in full, stamped, dated, and countersigned by their day clerk. Trask looked at the paper, then at me, then at the paper. Nobody has mentioned a note, he said. They will, I said. Around noon. I'd like it on your desk before it's on your desk. I'd like to tell you I did something clever to get it. I didn't. The note doesn't exist yet in any real sense. It's a scrap of paper waiting to be filled in. So I went to Vane & Sons at dawn, paid 1100 silver I didn't have, and closed a debt that was never taken. Where does a ward get 1100 silver? He sells a cloak, gray wool, silver clasp, beautiful piece. A dealer in the Eastern Quarter gave me 400 for it, which is robbery. And then I sold my seat at the season's hunt, which no one bothered to take away from me because no one thought I'd ever use it, for another 7. Yes, that cloak, the one that comes back on the night of judgment as evidence. I know, I'm getting to it. Noon arrived, and so did Killian, with 2 advisors and a face full of sorrow. Trask, he said gently, I'm afraid there's a matter. It concerns Soren. I want to handle it quietly. He's family, and I won't have him shamed. The vain note, Trask said. Killian's sorrow held. Yes, closed. Trask didn't look up. Paid at dawn, stamped by their day clerk. It's been on my desk since 7. And here's the moment I want framed and hung in my house. If I ever get a house, Killian Dusk, hero of my book, standing in a stone room with his mouth very slightly open, holding a piece of paper that had become a joke while he was carrying it. That's not possible, he said. It's stamped, Trask said. It's dated a year ago. It's stamped. Trask is not on my side. I want to be clear about that. Trask is on the side of the stamp. Trask would step over my body to file something correctly. That's what makes him useful. He's the only man in House Dusk who cannot be talked into anything, and Killian just tried to talk him into something, in front of 2 advisors, with a document that was already dead. Where did he get 1100 silver? One of the advisors murmured. Nobody had an answer. So they all made one up privately, and every version they made up was worse for Killian than the truth. Loss, day 2, entered in the ledger. Killian Dusk minus the treasurer. Trask now flinches at his name. That's not sentiment. That's procedure. From this morning, every paper Killian brings into that room gets read twice. And it cost me. I felt it on the way out. I reached for chapter 8, the one where Killian gets Trask's signature and the machinery starts moving, and there was a flat nothing where it used to be, my own handwriting torn off at the edge. Chapter 6, gone. Chapter 8, gone. 2 rooms dark, 5 days left, and I just paid 1,100 silver and 1 chapter of eyesight for a morning. The arithmetic on this is not good, and I do know it. That night I came back to the linen store and the lamp outside my door was out. That's not nothing. That corridor lamp is the only reason the laundry passage isn't a black pipe, and there's a step at the end of it that eats ankles. Somebody had capped it. I stood there in the dark for a second, doing the thing you do, hand out, counting steps, and I heard the study door at the far end open, and Killian's voice say, "He uses the laundry stair, doesn't he? Bring a lamp." 2 of them, coming down. And in a dark passage, a ward can have an accident on a step, and it's nobody's fault. And there's no crime, no witness, no seal required. I didn't move. Couldn't, I'd have made noise. They got about 10 steps in, and the light stopped. "Which stair is it?" One of them said, "This one." "There's no lamp." "So light one." "With what?" The wall sconce is capped, a pause. Then Killian's man said the words that saved my ankles. "My lord, if the ward falls on an unlit stair and someone asks why the lamp was out," and they went back up. I stood in the black for a long time, because somebody had capped that lamp before they got there. Somebody had turned my corridor into a place where an accident would leave a mark on the record, because an unlit stair isn't an accident. It's a question, and questions get asked in daylight by clerks. Somebody had made me unkillable in the dark by taking away the light. I went and looked at the sconce. Black gloves leave a smear on brass. Everyone else's hands leave skin. Right. Let me say what I did with the rest of that night. I sat on a crate and I turned pages, hunting for a woman who wasn't in the book. Day 3, I took Bart's key down to the lower stacks. The archive of House Dusk is 2 floors. The upper one is a library, all lamps and polish, where the family goes to be seen reading. The lower one is where the truth lives. Registries, land grants, the old ledgers with the crossings out. It smells like a barn in there, and every step you take, the dust goes up your nose and tells you off. I found the Vale Registry in the 4th aisle. Season by season, every noble house, every name, every entry. House Vale, current generation. Lord Vale, 2 sons and a daughter. The page for the daughter had been cut out. Not torn. Not lost. Cut, a blade along the gutter so clean the binding hadn't even loosened. Somebody had taken a knife into a locked archive and removed 1 page of 1 registry and put the book back on the shelf perfectly straight. Which was interesting for one reason. In my world, a page went missing from Lenora Vale's story too. My editor cut her introduction chapter for pacing. Same page, same woman. 2 universes, coincidence is a thing writers use when they're tired. I was extremely tired when I wrote this book, but I was never that tired. I put the registry back and went up into the daylight and got humiliated in front of 40 people, which was scheduled. The morning room again. Lenora had gone bigger this time because the bet was public and the houses were watching to see if House Vale would deliver. "The ward will move that chair," she said. 1 chair. Oak, carved the size of a bathtub, at the top of the room where the guest of honor sits. She wanted it in the corridor, alone, by hand, with the entire Eastern Circle sitting there eating breakfast and enjoying it. I got under it. It weighed what a chair like that weighs, which is roughly a bad idea, and by the second door frame my back had opinions, and the room had a running commentary going. Lord Hald read a letter. Killian said, "Really, Lady Vale? He'll hurt himself." In exactly the voice you use when you want a room to remember you objected. Mia held her hands to her mouth. And when I came level with Lenora, sweating, gripping the arms of a chair that cost more than my mother's life, I said it quietly. "Just for her. You're not doing this for them." She went very still, 1 second, maybe less. Then she said, faster, loud enough for the tables, and I took the chair out and the room laughed, and she turned away and knocked over her own cup. Lenora Vale doesn't knock things over. I wrote her hands. Then Mia Rowe made her move, and I'd like everyone to notice that she made it on day 3, 4 chapters early, because I'd rattled her. She went for a court of honor. Here's how that works. A servant or a ward can be brought before 3 lords for conduct. There's no evidence in a court of honor. There's no ledger. There's a lady of good standing crying, and there are 3 men who would rather die than be seen doubting her. And at the end of it, a ward gets whipped or removed and nobody has to sign anything. It's the cleanest way to erase me. No seal, no crime, no Trask. I wrote it as Mia's best trick. She uses it in chapter 11 against a laundry girl, and it's ugly, and readers loved it because they thought she was doing it for good reasons. So at noon, in the long gallery, Mia Rowe stood up in front of Lord Bane, Lord Iskra, and Killian Dusk, with tears already loaded, and said that the ward Soren Kai had come to her room at night and frightened her. Beautiful. Unfalsifiable. Nobody's ever been asked to prove a fright. Lord Bane's face went stiff and noble. Lord Iskra reached for his gloves, and I said, "Which night?" Mia blinked through the tears. You should pick one, I said. Because Lord Bane is going to want the date. And then his steward is going to check who held the laundry passage key on that date. And it's going to be an interesting conversation for everyone. The ward is not permitted to question the lady, Lord Iskra said. He isn't, I agreed, so I won't. I'll ask a different question. Mia, when you tell this story properly, do you tell it the way you told it to Lord Bane's nephew in the orangery last spring? About the other ward? The one from House Iskra? The gallery went quiet in a way that gallery quiet does not normally go. 'Cause here's the thing about my heroine. Chapter 12. She does this again. She'll do it to Lord Iskra's own nephew next season for exactly the same reason, because he's inconvenient and Iskra will never know. Because I wrote it as a thing that happens off page. I hadn't accused her of anything. I'd asked a question with a shape. And Lord Iskra, a man who has one nephew and would set fire to this hall for him, turned his head and looked at Mia Rowe for the first time all week, with his gloves half on. What ward from my house? Iskra said. Nothing, Mia said. It's nothing. He's twisting. What ward from my house? And Mia Rowe, who has never in 200,000 words been asked a direct question by a man who wasn't already in love with her, did the thing she does. She reached for the tears and she found them, and they came. And Iskra watched them arrive with the expression of a man watching a machine fill a cup. He put his gloves back in his belt. This court is not sitting, Iskra said, and walked out. Lord Bane followed him within a minute, because in the Eastern Circle you never stay in a room. Iskra leaves. Court of honor. Dead in 90 seconds. Not by me. By her doing the only trick she's got, in front of the one man in the building who'd just been given a reason to time it. Loss, day 3. Mia Rowe, minus a patron. Killian, minus his informant's credibility, which is worse because an informant nobody believes is just a woman who knows things about you. Cut to the small study, evening, where my heroine was explaining herself. And my hero was learning that a beautiful smile does not work on the back of someone's head. He knew about the orangery, Mia said. Killian was at the window. He knew about Iskra's nephew. Killian, he knew what I said in a garden with 2 people present, and one of them was me. Yes, how? I don't know. Very calm. Killian's calm is a beautiful thing right up until you notice his thumb has worn a shine into the wax of a seal he can't use. I don't know, and it's the 3rd time in 3 days that I've said that sentence. And I've been in this house since I was 9, and I have never said it before this week. Then he turned around, and his voice was warm again, and it made my skin crawl to write. The 7th, he said, in front of all 5 houses. Everyone in the hall, everyone in the ledger, everyone he's ever spoken to, in one room at one time, and the cloak on the table. He smiled at her. Whatever he knows, he can only say it once. So we let him say it in a room where the ending is already written. That's my line, by the way. I gave him that line in chapter 7. Word for word. He didn't know he was quoting. Day 3, night, I went and did the stupidest thing I have done in either world. Lenora Vale keeps to the West Gallery after dark, because the West Gallery has one entrance and no chairs, which tells you a lot about how a woman expects an evening to go. I walked in. She didn't turn. The bet doesn't move faster if you come to me, and I said, the loom sold in the 3rd winter, but the shuttle didn't. She kept the shuttle. Silence. That's a line from the burned draft. Sela Kai's shuttle. It's not in the book, it's not in the appendix, it's not in this world. It lives in a deleted file on a laptop in an apartment I will never see again. Lenora Vale turned around and said, because a loom is a debt, and a shuttle is a promise, and she said she'd get the loom back before the 4th. Next line, the one after mine, in the draft, in order. You want to know what it feels like when someone finishes your sentence out of a document that was never printed, never spoken, never shown to a living soul? It feels like standing on a stair with no lamp. How? I said. She was already white. She'd heard herself say it. I watched it land on her a half-second after it left her mouth. And Lenora Vale, who had spent 3 days running this estate like a kennel, put her hand on the rail like the floor had moved. Get out of my gallery, she said. Lenora, get out of my gallery, Soren Kai, she said, and her voice cracked straight down the middle on my name. I got out of her gallery, and an hour later, Killian's men put me in the cold store. That's chapter 6's job, in the book. The ward gets locked in overnight, so he's docile and grateful in the morning. Stone room under the kitchen, no window, a door with a bar. You go in at 9 and you come out at 6 with your teeth going. They expected knocking. That's the whole design. You knock. They don't come. You shout. They don't come. And by 4 in the morning, you've become a man who asks for things. I sat down against the far wall and slept for 6 hours, which I'd like to claim as defiance, but was mostly logistics. It's warmer on the floor and I was extremely tired. At 6, they opened the door, and the passage outside had the morning staff in it, cooks, 2 footmen, the girl who does the fires, and Killian standing there ready to be magnanimous about it. I came out and I said loud enough for the passage, "Thank you for the quiet, brother. Best sleep I've had since I came to this house. Beat." "Really?" I said. "The linen store's next to the laundry. Steam all night. If it's free, I'd take the cold store permanently." The girl who does the fires laughed. She got it in before she could stop it. One bright snort in a stone corridor, and then 2 cooks went, and then a footman had to look at the ceiling. And Killian Dusk stood in his own kitchen passage while his staff laughed at his punishment. That's the loss, day 4, and it's the one that actually hurt him, the staff. Not the patrons, not the treasurer. Staff talk. By evening, every house in the Eastern Circle knew that the young master of House Dusk locked his ward in a cellar, and the ward came out and offered to move in. Killian's hands were shaking when he walked away. I watched them. Oh, and one more thing about that cold store. There were tally marks scratched into the inside of the door. 12 of them. Fresh. The scratches were bright. The stone dust was still in the grooves, and they were at the height of someone who'd been sitting where I'd been sitting, working at it with something small and hard, over and over for a long time. 12. Nobody had been in that room in a year. I asked the cook about that door. Casually, over the bread, like a man making conversation instead of a man with his stomach in his shoes. "Cold store," I said. "Who was in it last?" She thought about it while she worked. "You were love before me." "Nobody," she shrugged. "Nobody's been down there in a year. It's a store. Things go in it, not people. Lord Hall doesn't hold with the old punishments. That's the young master's idea, that is. And I'll thank you not to repeat that." "Nobody at all? In a year?" She looked up. "Why? No reason," I said, and went and stood in a corridor for a while with my hands over my face. 12 marks, fresh, in a room nobody's entered in a year, at sitting height, cut by somebody with time and something small and hard and a very good reason to keep count. I'm the author. I know every scene in this book. That door isn't in it. Meanwhile, Killian was out shopping for a patron, and it was going beautifully. He needed one. That's the thing about the Morton disaster. An unbacked seal is a paperweight. To move a name in the ledger, he had to have a second endorsement by the 7th. And there are exactly 4 houses in the Eastern Circle that can give one, and one of them is his own. So he went to House Balan. Old wine, older money, a lord with a soft voice and the survival instincts of a barnacle. Killian was charming. Killian is always charming. He explained about the ward and the debt and the sad necessity of it. And Billen listened to the whole thing with his hands folded, and then said, "Morton endorsed you." Morton's arrangement was separate. "Morton endorsed you," Billen said, "and then Morton wrote 2 pages of apology to your father, and now Morton doesn't come to dinner." "I like dinner." He stood up, which in Balan language is a door. "Bring me your father's signature, and I'll sign anything you like," which Killian can't do. That's the entire point of this exercise. If Hald Dusk signs it, Hald owns it, and Hald doesn't put his hand on a thing until he knows which way it's going to fall. Loss, day 3, second entry, House Balan. He didn't just fail to get a patron. He walked out of Balan's study having taught a lord of the Eastern Circle that endorsing Killian Dusk is now a thing that costs you dinner invitations. That's the trouble with a cascade. It doesn't stop when you'd like it to. Every man he asks from here on has heard about the last man he asked. He had 3 days to find a signature. I had 3 days to make sure the only signature he could find was mine. Day 4, I stopped being polite about it. I found her in the East Garden at noon, in front of maybe 15 people, which was deliberate on my part. She's harder to walk away from with an audience. That's how a bet works. It cuts both ways. "Lord Hald will come through that arch in about 2 minutes," I said. "He'll ask you about the Western water rights. He'll pretend it's small talk." "It isn't." Lenora didn't look up from her gloves. "And then he'll go to the stables," she said. I stopped. "He goes to the stables," she said, on the 4th day. He always goes to the stables on the 4th day, because Vale's waterman rides in at noon on the 4th and Hald likes to meet him where there's no ledger. He's done it every. She stopped too. Hald Dusk came through the arch, asked about the Western water rights, pretending it was small talk, and he went to the stables. The book does not have a stables scene. Chapter 9. Hald asks about water in the East Garden, and the scene ends. I know because I wrote it, and because I'd never once thought about where the man goes afterwards. Because he isn't a person. He's a plot device with a beard. Lenora Vale knew where he goes afterwards, because she's watched him do it. Every what? I said. Nothing. You said he's done it every. I stepped in front of her. Finish the sentence. Move. How many times have you watched Hald Dusk go to the stables on the 4th day, Lenora? And she looked at me with an expression I have absolutely never written on any character in my life, and she said, 12. The garden noise kept going. Birds, gravel, someone laughing at the far end. And in the middle of it, the villainess of my book stood there with her hands in black gloves and told me the arithmetic. 12 times, 12 seasons, 12 first evenings in the Hall of Names. 12 times a girl watched a word get read out loud off a nameplate. 12 times she watched the days go by in an order she knew by heart. And 12 times she reached the 7th day. And 12 times you die, she said. Just like that. Flat, in a garden, at noon. On the 7th, she said. Every time. In every version. I have tried. And her voice did the crack again, and she killed it, and got it back. I have tried it standing next to you. I tried it standing in front of you. I told your father, I told the houses, I brought Vale men into this estate. I took you out through the eastern gate on the 5th, and they had you back inside the walls by the 6th, with a rope on you and Killian smiling about it. And on the 7th they struck your name out of the ledger and put you out the gate. And by morning you were dead in the eastern quarter, and nobody ever wrote it down. She stopped. The birds carried on. So this time, she said, I'm doing the opposite. I'm making it unbearable. I'm making this house so vile to you that you walk out of it yourself before the 7th, and you never come back, and you live. The tally marks, 12, in the cold store door. The lamp she capped so nobody could hurt me in the dark without leaving a question in the record. The bet, public, humiliating, dignity-shredding bet made in front of 5 houses with her own name on it. You didn't bet you'd break me, I said. I bet you'd leave, Lenora said. Everyone heard the word beg and stopped listening, because that's what people do when they think they know a woman's character. She shrugged. It was the worst shrug I've ever seen. I've had 12 tries at doing this the kind way. It doesn't work. So this time, I'm the villain. And you walk out on day 5, and you spend a long, boring life somewhere else being annoying at someone who deserves it. And then, quieter. This is the last one, 13. There isn't another. I can feel where the edge is. I want to tell you I said something devastating. What I actually said after about 4 seconds was, you wagered your house's honor, in public, on saving a guy you've never had a real conversation with. Yes. That's insane. Yes, Lenora. I put my hands over my face for a second because the small man in my head was doing laps again. Lenora, you've been trying to save a character. She frowned. What? I took my hands down. 12 times you've tried to save a character in a book, I said. That's why it doesn't work. You've been arguing with the plot. You can't beat a plot from inside it. You can only ride it, and you've ridden it 12 times, and it dumps you at the same wall, because that's what it's for. You're not making sense. This is the first time, I said, that you're talking to the author. Silence. I wrote it, I said. All of it. 5 houses, the water rights, your 2 brothers, Hald's beard, Killian's cloak, the night of judgment. The 11 minutes it took me to kill Soren Kai on page 406. I typed this world in a room with a broken radiator, and I sold it for enough money to not move house. And then I woke up in the only character I ever deleted, which is either poetry or a filing error, and I've had it in my head since the first evening, every scene in order, like pages. She stared at me. Prove it, she said. Your introduction chapter got cut, I said. You had one. It was 14 pages. It opened with you at 9 years old in the Western Hall, doing your letters at the long table because your mother wouldn't let you eat until you'd written her name correctly. And you wrote it wrong on purpose for a week to see if she'd let you starve. I watched it hit her. And she did. 4 days. And on the 5th, you wrote it perfectly, and she said, good girl, and never mentioned it again. And that's the whole reason you are the way you are. And my editor cut it because she said it slowed the book down. Lenora Vale did not move at all. Nobody knows that, she said. I know, I said. I cut it. That's the moment the season broke in half, because up until then we'd been 2 people playing chess with the same book. She knew the moves from 12 games. I knew the moves from writing them. And now we both knew the truth, which is that this week has stopped being the book at all. I'd burned 2 chapters already. She'd made a bet she never made in any of the 12. Killian moved his schedule up 4 chapters. Mia's Court of Honor died on day 3 instead of chapter 11. Neither of us can see the 7th day anymore. She's flying blind because I keep changing it. I'm flying blind because she was never on the page. So what do we do? She said. It wasn't sarcasm. That's what got me. She actually asked. You lose your bet, I said. Soren, you lose it publicly. On the 7th, at the night of judgment, in front of the 5 houses, you stand up and say House Vale forfeits. I was already walking. Because if I'm in that hall on the 7th, they're going to strike a name out of the ledger. That part's happening. I wrote it, and it's got its hooks in, and it's going to happen whatever we do. Then leave, she said. For once, please. I stopped at the arch. Lenora, I said, I'm not going to survive the night of judgment. I'm going to run it. Day 4, evening. My brother did me the biggest favor of my life, and he did it because he was frightened. He came to the linen store himself. That's how frightened. Killian Dusk in a laundry passage with a folded paper in his hand and a lamp he'd brought himself because he didn't want a footman in the corridor. You're clever, he said. I've been unfair to you. I want to fix it. Sure, I said. There's a place in this house for you. A real one. Land registrar for the Eastern Holdings. It's a good post, it's got a stipend, it's got rooms with a window. He held out the paper. You'd stop guessing at things. In galleries, in front of people. And in exchange, nothing, he said, smiling. You just sign, and it's yours, and your family. And this unpleasant season is behind us. I took the contract. Now, I'd like to say I read it carefully, but I didn't have to. I've read 100 of these. It's the standard House Dusk appointment instrument, and the standard instrument has a clause at the top. Clause 2, 5 lines, boring as a wall. That establishes the authority of the person making the appointment. It has to. You can't hand out a post in a house's name unless you can prove you hold the house's authority to do it. So clause 2 of that paper said, in Killian's own hand, I, Killian Dusk, holder of the seal of House Dusk since the 11th, being empowered to bind the house in all matters of appointment, holder of the seal since the 11th. The theft I'm going to be accused of on the 7th happens on the 14th. He wrote in ink in his own hand and signed that he has personally held the seal of House Dusk since 3 days before the seal was stolen. I looked at that clause for about a second and a half. The small man in my head sat down. Something wrong? Killian said. No, I said. It's generous. I signed it. Right there on the wall of a laundry passage with his own lamp, and I gave it back and let him fold it and put it in his coat. And Killian Dusk walked back up the stairs feeling much better. He'd handed me a rope and asked me to hold it while he tied the knot. The book had a version of this scene, by the way. In chapter 10, Killian offers Soren the registrar's post to shut him up. And Soren, proud, stupid, exactly as written, tears it up in his face. I didn't tear it up. 2 hours later, she came to my door. I want the record to show that Lenora Vale, of House Vale, who has never in her life walked down a laundry passage, stood outside a converted linen store with the corridor lamp still capped and said, tell me something that isn't in the book. That's a weird flirt. Tell me something. So I did. I told her about the radiator that didn't work, and the noodles, and that I wrote her introduction chapter in one night, and that the editor's note in the margin said, cut. Nobody cares about the villain's childhood. And that I fought about it for 2 emails and then gave up, because I was tired and the money was already spent. She listened to all of it with her arms folded. Then she said, what's a radiator? It's a metal thing on a wall that's supposed to make heat, does it? Not mine. And Lenora Vale laughed. Not a court laugh, not the ripple. An actual, ugly, undignified laugh, one snort of it. And she covered it with her hand immediately like she'd dropped something expensive. And I stood there in a laundry passage with my heart doing something very stupid indeed. Internal note. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. She's the villainess. I'm the deleted guy. There are 3 days left. Get a grip. Say something else, she said. Say something that isn't written. So I told her the truth, which is worse than flirting. On the 7th, when it's done, I said, I want you to say the loom line again, out loud, in front of them, because I cut it, and it deserved to be in. She stopped laughing. Do you know what the worst part of 12 is? She said. It isn't the 7th day. I can do the 7th day. I've done it 12 times. I know exactly how it goes. I know which stone in the eastern gate you go past last. She said it evenly, like a woman reading out a weight. The worst part is the first evening. The Hall of Names. Every single time I come back, you're standing at the end of that line holding your plate, and you don't know me. 12 first evenings with a stranger who has my whole life in his face. I didn't have anything for that. So this year I took the plate off you, she said, and I read it out loud, and I put the one line in it that would make you look at me like a person instead of a lady. That's why you said the loom. It worked, didn't it, Lenora? I said. You humiliated me in front of 5 houses to get my attention. I got it, she said. And she was already walking away down the passage, and over her shoulder without turning round, in the driest voice in the Eastern Circle. Fix your radiator. Internal note. I'm in enormous trouble. Soren, she said, on the 7th U. I know, 12 times. 13's a better number, I said. Ask any editor. And around the corner at the top of the laundry stair in the dark that a capped lamp makes, Mia Rose stood very still and listened to the whole thing. She didn't run to Killian. Give her credit, she's better than that. She waited until morning, and she made it sound like she'd been worried about him. Lady Vale is protecting him, Mia said. Killian looked up from his breakfast. She was at his door. Killian, she stood in the laundry passage for an hour, and she was laughing. I'd like to describe what happened to my brother's face, and I'm going to do it accurately, because it's the last honest thing his face ever did. Nothing. Nothing happened to it. It emptied, the warmth just walked out of it, like a house at the end of a lease, and what was sitting there over the eggs was a very handsome young man, with no expression on at all. The bet was on the 7th, he said. Yes. Then he doesn't reach the 7th. Mia's hand went to her mouth for real this time. Said quietly as for problems. He's become a problem. Killian folded his napkin. He folded it beautifully. He does everything beautifully. That's the whole trouble with him. Move it tonight. No better. And then he smiled, and my stomach dropped, because I know that smile I built it. The night of judgment, all 5 houses. But not as a family matter. Mia went pale. As what? As an open hearing, Killian said. Before all the houses, with the cloak on the table and the whole Eastern Circle watching a Vale girl bet her family's honor on a thief. And there it was. He'd just chained Lenora to me. If I go down in that hall, she doesn't just lose a wager. She's the daughter of House Vale, who staked her name in public on a man exposed as a thief before all 5 houses. Her family eats it for a generation. Her brothers eat it. Vale's water rights, Vale's marriages, Vale's seat, all of it on my back in one night. The court had been quietly doubling the bets all week. By day 4, the book on it was the biggest of the season, and half the Eastern Circle had money on the ward crawling. So do you see the shape of the trap? For her to save her house, I have to be broken in public. For her to save me, she has to burn her house down. And the only person who could possibly have designed a cage that ugly is the man who wrote it, me. Chapter 10. I gave Killian the open hearing idea myself 400 pages ago, and I remember thinking, that's a nice escalation. I took the hit. That's what I did on the last night of the 4th day. And I want it on the record because it's the only thing in this whole story I did that I'd call brave. Killian came at me in the great hall in front of 30 people, and he was good. He was really good. He stood there with grief all over him and said that his brother had gone into his room, taken his cloak, sold it in the Eastern Quarter for 400 silver, and that the dealer would say so, which was true, and I said nothing. I stood there and let a room of 30 people watch the ward of House Dusk get called a thief and give no answer at all. And I watched Lord Hald do arithmetic. And I watched Lenora Vale grip the back of a chair hard enough to whiten her knuckles inside black gloves, and I said nothing. Because the answer, the real one, the thing that turns that cloak from evidence into a noose only works once, and it works in a room with 5 houses in it. And I was not going to spend it on 30. 3 days? That's what I had left. I went down to the lower stacks that night and found Bart on his stool with his lens. Bart, I said, I don't need protection. Good, he said, because I'm 61. I need the true registry. The lens came off. He looked at me for a long moment, and then he looked at the aisle behind me, the 4th one, the one with the cut page, and something in his old face moved. Boy, he said, if you go into the understacks, you don't come out a ward. I know, you come out something they have to answer, Bart, I said. What's under the registry? And Uncle Bart, 4 lines in the whole book, said the thing that broke this world open, the Chronicle. The 5th morning, I reached for the 7th day, and it wasn't there. I want to describe this properly, because it's the worst thing that has happened to me in either world, and that includes dying in a book I wrote. Chapter 7 had been sitting behind my eyes since the first evening. 16 pages. The hall, the 5 houses, the cloak on the table, the ledger, the Eastern Gate, 11 minutes of typing that ends a man. I'd been carrying it around all week, the way you carry a diagnosis. I reached for it at dawn on the 5th day, the way you'd check a clock. Gone. Not dim, not partial, a flat nothing with my own handwriting torn off at the edges. Exactly like Chapter 6, exactly like Chapter 8. And where 16 pages of my own words used to live there was a hole in my head the size of my life. I sat on the crate for a while. Then I laughed, which alarmed the laundry girl through the wall. Because of course it's gone. I burned Morton. I burned the debt. I killed a court of honor on day 3 that was supposed to happen in chapter 11. I sold the cloak. Killian moved the hearing. Lenora made a bet that exists in no draft of anything. The 7th day I wrote does not exist anymore. I've been erasing it all week with my own hands. One favor, one lie, one wrecked patron at a time. I'm the author. I can't read my own book. I've scribbled all over it. I found her in the West Gallery and told her, and Lenora Vale, 13th time round, folded her arms and said, "Welcome, that's how I live. It's horrible. It's Tuesday. How do you stand it?" "I don't," she said. "I count, right. 2 blind people and a hearing in 2 days. Excellent. Wonderful. Let me tell you what I did with it. I went to the Treasury office, and I killed the seal. Here's the thing nobody in House Dusk has ever bothered to read. The Charter. 12 pages, dull as a wall, written by me on a Sunday when I needed to make the legal parts of the book feel real. Because readers will forgive anything except a world where the paperwork doesn't add up. So I did the work. I invented a whole verification procedure, and I was proud of it, and nobody in 300 reviews ever mentioned it. Because nobody has ever in the history of anything been excited by Clause 14. Clause 14. Any member of the household may lodge a challenge of authenticity against the house seal. Upon lodging, the seal is suspended for 3 days pending sight of the countersigned register. Any member, including a ward. Trask read my challenge twice, which for Trask is an emotional outburst. "You're challenging your own house's seal," he said. "I'm challenging the authenticity of the impression," I said. "Lord Morton's endorsement was withdrawn in writing after the impression was made. That means the register no longer matches the wax. That's a discrepancy." Clause 14 says, "A discrepancy suspends the seal for 3 days." For 3 days, Trask sat there with his hands flat on the desk. And I watched a man who has spent his life being the side of the stamp discover that the stamp had, technically, procedurally, in writing, gone wrong. "It does say that," he said in the voice of a man in love. "The seal of House Dusk went into a box at 11 in the morning. On the 5th day, Killian found out at noon. I know exactly when, because you could hear it. Because now, to strike a name out of the ledger at the night of judgment, he needed the seal of another house to stand as guarantor." That's Clause 15, and I wrote that one too. And I remember thinking it was a nice touch. There are 4 houses in the Eastern Circle who could stand for him. Morton wouldn't take his letters. Ellen had told him to bring his father's signature. Iskra had watched Mia Rowe cry at him in a gallery and had opinions now, which left House Vale. Which left her. Do you understand what I'd just done? I'd handed Lenora Vale a veto. 1 word. She says no, there's no guarantor, there's no ledger entry, there's no erasure, and the night of judgment becomes 5 houses eating a very expensive dinner. I built her a door. She said yes. Killian went to her at 3 in the afternoon in the East Garden with 15 people watching, and he did the whole performance. The sorrow, the family, the sad necessity. And Lenora Vale looked at him for about 4 seconds and said, "House Vale will stand guarantor," and every person in that garden turned to look at me. I'd like to report that I stayed cold. I did stay cold. Outwardly, I was a man made of a filing cabinet. Inside, the small guy was on the floor. That night, I went to her gallery, and I asked, and I got it, all of it, and I wish I hadn't. "Why?" "Because I've said no before," Lenora said. She was at the rail with her back to me, and she said it the way you read a list. "You've read too many times." "The 4th time," she said. "That's the one you want." On the 4th loop, I stopped it. I went to my father. I spent every favor House Vale has in the Eastern Circle. And when the 7th came, there was no guarantor and no hearing and no ledger entry. And I stood in that hall and watched Killian Dusk smile at me and say what a happy outcome it was. She turned around. "And you were dead by the 9th, she said, "in your room. They said your heart stopped. You were 22, and your heart stopped, and there was no hearing, no record, no 5 houses, nobody in the room, nothing written down anywhere. Just a ward who died of nothing in a house that doesn't have to explain itself." Her voice stayed level. That was the worst part. It took me 2 more loops to understand what I'd done. I'd taken away the audience. I sat down on the gallery step. "The 9th loop," she said. "I took you out. 5th day through the Eastern Gate, Vale horses, Vale men, 200 miles. They had you back inside these walls by the 6th with a rope on your wrists. Because a ward is house property and House Dusk sent a lawful retrieval and my father folded in an afternoon. Killian met the cart himself. He was so pleased with me. He thanked me for the exercise. He said it saved him the trouble of inventing a reason. "Lenora, 12, she said. "I have tried it 12 ways. I hid you. I moved you. I begged. I threatened. I bought 2 of Killian's men and he hanged them. I told your father the truth on the 3rd day, and he did his arithmetic. And once I told you everything. Everything. exactly like this, on the second day, and you believed me, and you spent 5 days being careful, and careful men die tidily on the 7th. She came down 2 steps. There is exactly one thing I have never done, she said. Let it happen, let the hearing sit, let all 5 houses be in that hall, on the record, with the doors open, and let you be standing in it. Because if there's an audience, then it costs something to kill you, she said. That's all I've got, Soren. That's my whole plan after 12 years. Make it expensive. And then she said the thing I'm going to be hearing for the rest of my life. I said yes, so that when they come for you, they have to do it in front of everybody. I want to describe what I did with my face at that moment, and I can't, because I don't know. I've written 47 people. I don't have a line for this. You could have told me on the first evening, I said. I did. Loop 2. You had me removed from the estate as a lunatic. Fair. Loop 6, you tried to have me married off. That doesn't sound like me. You were 19 in Loop 6 and extremely stupid. She almost smiled. You're better this time. You're worse to be around, but you're better. Then she took my nameplate off her belt, 2 days early. She'd worn it in front of 5 houses for 4 days like a hunting trophy, with lords writing odds in a book with her family's honor hanging off it. She unhooked it and put it in my hands and did not make a speech about it. You lost the bet, I said. I lost it on the 2nd day, Lenora said. The court finds out on the 7th. She started up the stairs. Then, without turning, if you ever tell anyone I did that, I'll say you're a liar and I'll be believed, because I'm a Vale and you're a ward and I have a very good face for it. Internal note, I'm not fixing anything. I'm making it worse. I'm making it much, much worse, and I'm doing it on purpose, and I'd do it again. Day 6, I went under the archive. Bart's key opened the lower stacks. The understacks are something else. A door at the back of the 4th aisle, behind a shelf that hasn't moved since before Hald was born. And Bart went down first with the lamp because he's 61 and mildly suicidal. It's 1 room, stone, dry, 1 book on a stand. The Chronicle, Bart said. I want to explain what that book is, in this world, before I explain what it is to me, because otherwise the second part won't land. Every noble house in the Eastern Circle, Dusk, Vale, Morton, Balan, Iskra, proves itself out of 1 document. Blood, land, title, order of precedence, the right to hold a seal, the right to sit at a night of judgment. All 5 houses trace it to the founding chronicle. It isn't a symbol, it's the deed. Every registry in every house is a copy of a copy of a copy of the entries in that book, and when 2 lords argue about a river, they don't fight. They go to the chronicle and read. It's the source, it's the thing under the thing. I opened it. And it was my appendix. Not a version of it, not similar to. Mine, the 12-page world-building document I wrote as back matter for the paperback, because my editor said the readers wanted a family tree and a map, and I did it in 2 nights while eating cereal for dinner. And I invented the founding families out of nothing. And I named the rivers after streets in the city I grew up in. And I made up the precedence order because I wanted House Dusk to be first in the list for aesthetic reasons. Aesthetic reasons. 5 houses have been killing each other over the precedence order for 300 years. Because I thought dusk sounded good first. I stood in that room and read my own handwriting on parchment that has been kept in a stone box under a noble house since before anyone alive was born, and my hands were doing something I'd rather not describe. Bart held the lamp up. You've gone a color boy, Bart, I said. Who can read this? Nobody reads it, he said, offended. It's read from. Lords come, the archivist reads them the entry, they go away. So the archivist reads it, And nobody has ever checked it against anything? Bart looked at me like I'd asked whether anyone checks the sun. Against what? He said. It's the Chronicle. It's what you check things against. Let me put the shape of this in 1 sentence, because it's the thing the whole week has been walking toward. I am not the ward of House Dusk. I am not a side character in this book. I'm the document under the floor of every noble house in the Eastern Circle, and on the 7th evening, those 5 houses were planning to sit in 1 room and vote on whether I'm real. And that's when the second thing hit me, and it's worse. Lenora's page. Somebody had gone into a locked archive with a blade and taken 1 page out of the Vale registry. Not the Chronicle, the registry. Somebody who knew that the Chronicle exists and knew that registries are copies and knew exactly which copy to cut. Bart, I said. Who else has been down here? The old man's face did a thing. The young master, he said. Twice this season, he has the family right. He signs the book. Show me the book. There's a ledger by the stair. Every entry to the lower stacks, name and date, because Bart is a professional even when nobody is watching. And there it was in that beautiful, confident hand. Killian Dusk, the 9th, Killian Dusk, the 11th, the 11th. The same day he wrote in his own contract that he took the seal of House Dusk. He came down here on the 11th, and he went up with the seal. Now here's what I couldn't work out for about a minute. Standing in a stone room with a lamp. Why cut her page? Killian doesn't care about Lenora Vale. She's a rival house's daughter with a sharp mouth. In the book, he barely notices her. Then I turned it over, and it was so simple I wanted to sit down. Clause 15. The guarantor clause, the one I wrote on a Sunday. A house standing guarantor at a night of judgment must be represented by a registered heir of the blood whose entry stands in the house registry. Whose entry stands in the house registry? Lenora Vale's entry does not stand in the house registry. Somebody cut it out with a knife on the 11th, which means the guarantor she gave him, in the East Garden, in front of 15 people. The yes she paid for with everything is void. She doesn't know. She can't. Nobody reads registries. They read the copies of the copies. The entry's still in Vale's own house book, and in every practical sense in this world, Lenora Vale is Lenora Vale. But on the 7th evening, at the hearing, in front of 5 houses, when she stands up as guarantor of House Vale, Killian Dusk gets to open the Dusk registry and show the Eastern Circle a gap where a woman should be. Not an accusation. A gap, a Vale daughter who isn't in the book. He'd take the hearing, and the ward, and the ledger entry, and then while everyone was still standing, he'd take House Vale's honor off the table too, because she'd staked it publicly on a thief and stood guarantor with no standing. That's not a plan. That's a hobby. He's been building it since the 11th, quietly for the fun of it, 4 days before he had any reason to hate me. That's my hero. Do you know what I felt, standing there? Not rage. I want to be honest about it because I've been telling you all week that anger is a status report. I felt professional embarrassment. I wrote a man who cuts pages out of women he hasn't met, and then I gave him a jawline and 600 comments. I went and told her. That took me most of an hour to decide, which tells you what a coward I am, because the smart play was to say nothing. Let her walk into that hall not knowing. Let her face do the honest thing when Killian opens the registry, because a woman who's genuinely ambushed plays better to a room than a woman who's ready. I told her anyway. Turns out I can't run the smart play on her. Noted, filed, deeply inconvenient. She listened to all of it standing in the West Gallery with her arms folded. And when I got to the part about the blade and the 11th, she said, "Show me." So at 2 in the morning, I took Lenora Vale into the lower stacks of a house that isn't hers, and Bart lit the lamp and pulled the Vale registry off the shelf and opened it at her family. And she looked at the clean cut where she used to be. She was quiet for a while. Then, "It's a very neat cut. Lenora, no, look at it," he measured. She traced the gutter with a finger, not touching. He did it properly, with a straight edge, so the binding wouldn't gape and the archivist wouldn't notice. That's 20 minutes of work. He sat down here on the 11th with a lamp and a rule and spent 20 minutes cutting out a stranger. 4 days before he had any reason to. He didn't need a reason. He had a use for it later. She closed the book. There are 3 Vale daughters of the blood who can stand guarantor at a hearing. He took one off the board on a Tuesday, in case. Then she laughed. That ugly, undignified single snort laugh in a stone room at 2 in the morning. "My mother cut me out of a week of dinners," she said. "Your editor cut me out of a book. Killian Dusk cut me out of a registry with a rule and a knife. What is it about me that makes people reach for scissors? The editor was an idiot, for the record. You were the editor's employee. I was the editor's coward." She looked at me sideways. "That's the first thing you've said all week I liked. Here's the part I want in the appendix of the appendix, though." I went down there to warn her, and I came back up with a weapon, and she's the one who found it. "He's going to use it," she said. "Tomorrow, in front of everyone. He's going to open the Dusk registry and show the Eastern Circle that Lenora Vale isn't in it, and my house eats it for a generation. Yes, Soren." She turned round, and her eyes had gone bright in a way that frightened me, and also did some other things I'm not discussing. "How does he know it's not there?" The stacks went very quiet. "Because he cut it," I said. "Because he cut it," Lenora said. "That's the only way anyone in this world knows a page is missing from a registry nobody reads. He cannot say my entry is void without telling 5 houses that he was in a locked archive with a blade. On the 11th, she said, which is the day he wrote in his own hand. In your contract, that he took the seal of House Dusk." I sat down on a crate in the dark and put my hands over my face, and I'd like to be honest about what was going on in there. Joy. Professional joy. Purest hit of it I've ever had. Better than the deal, better than the 600 comments. He doesn't have a plan. He has a confession with a plan drawn on top of it. "He'll only play the card if he thinks he's winning," I said. "Then let him think he's winning. That part's handled." "Since when?" "Since about 4 this afternoon," I said. I told the stairwell I was finished, and the stairwell had shoes on. So on the 6th day, I did the only thing an author can do to a character who's read ahead. I gave him a page. Here's how it worked. Mia Rowe has been carrying things to Killian all week. Every word I say, every corridor I stand in. She's been doing it so faithfully that she's become the most reliable delivery system in this house. So I stopped fighting it and started using it. I went down to the lower stacks with Bart in the middle of the afternoon, when the passage above has traffic, and I made sure the door was open, and I let my voice carry. The hearing's fine, I said. He's got the cloak, the dealer, and the debt. Once the seal comes out of suspension on the 7th, he'll have the guarantor, and it's done. There's nothing under the registry that helps me. It's just old land grants down here. It's the wrong room. Beat. I'm going to have to stand there and take it, I said. And I let my voice do a thing I have never let my voice do in front of anyone in this world. I let it get tired. Silence on the stair, and a very quiet shoe going away. 2 hours later, Mia Rowe told Killian that the ward had been in the archive, and that the archive is the wrong room, and that he had nothing, and that he'd sounded finished. And Killian Dusk sat down that evening and, for the first time in 6 days, believed he knew how the 7th went. He even wrote it out. I heard about this from a footman later, and I've never been prouder of anything. He wrote out the order of the hearing on a sheet of paper, the way a man writes a speech he intends to enjoy. The accusation, the dealer, the cloak, the ledger, and then at the bottom, underlined, the registry gap and the veil girl. He had a plan on a page. He got it from a woman who got it from me. I heard the rest of that evening from the maid who does the fires, who has been my favorite person in this house since she snorted in a stone corridor. He rehearsed it, out loud. In the small study, with the door shut, for 2 hours, my brother, 23 years old, heir presumptive of House Dusk, standing in front of a cold fireplace, saying his accusation to the wallpaper and then saying it again with a different pause in it. It gives me no pleasure, he told the wall. Then, it gives me no pleasure at all. Then, after some thought, it gives me no pleasure to stand here. 3 versions. He picked the third. Mia Rowe sat on the arm of the chair and watched him do it. And at some point, she asked the question she'd been carrying all week, and she asked it in her own voice, not the sweet one, not the tremble, the flat one underneath. What happens to me after? Killian didn't turn round. What do you mean, after tomorrow, when it's done? Lord Iskra won't take my letters. Lord Bane walks the other way in the gallery. I've spent everything I had on this, Killian, and I'd like to know what I get. You get to be in the room, he said. Beat. That's not an answer. It's the only one anybody gets, Killian said, and he said it kindly, which is his gift. Mia, the room is the whole thing. There's nothing else. Everyone in the Eastern Circle is standing in a hall tomorrow deciding what's true. And when they've decided, that's what will have been true forever. And the people who were in the room when it happened will be the people it happened for. He straightened his cuffs. You'll be in the room? She looked at him for a long moment. You cut something out of a book, she said. Didn't you? Good night, Mia. That's the closest my heroine ever came to a good line, and he stepped on it, and she let him. Which brings us to the old man, and the part I'm least proud of. They took Bart at the top of the stairs at 9 that night. He'd come up with the true registry under his coat, the Dusk House Register with the dates in it, the one that shows the seal moving on the 11th. And 2 of Killian's men were waiting at the archive door, and they took the book off him, and they took him. They didn't hurt him. That would have been a crime. What they did was better. Killian sent for me at 10. He had the registry on the table. He had Bart standing behind 2 men, 61 years old, in his own house with his lens still in his top pocket. Theft from the family archive, Killian said. Removal of a house register by a servant. That's the Eastern quarry at his age, and we both know what the quarry is at his age. He let that sit. Or, he said, you go tonight, renounce the wardship, sign the release, be out the Eastern gate before dawn, and the old man keeps his post and his back and his name, and everyone has a pleasant season. And Bart, 4 lines in the whole book, 4, said, don't you dare, boy, which is the 5th line, and I didn't write it, and it's the best one in the manuscript. I looked at Killian for a while. Here's what he was doing, and it's not stupid. It's what I would have written for him. He'd found the only lever in the world that works on me, and he'd found it in one day, because Mia Rowe is very good at her job. The ward will not trade an old man for a hearing. Every version of Soren Kai and every one of Lenora's 12 loops would have gone to that quarry himself first. All right, I said. Killian blinked. Sorry? All right, I said. Give me the release. He gave me the release. He was so surprised he did it fast, which was ideal because I didn't want him reading it slowly. I signed it on his table with his pen. Soren Kai renounces the wardship of House Dusk. All claims, all protections, all obligations, effective immediately, and departs the estate before dawn. Then I put the pen down, and I said, loud enough for the 2 men and the footman at the door and the maid in the passage, because I wanted witnesses and I wanted them dated. Witness that I have renounced. Witness the hour. And I walked out of my house at 11 at night with nothing. And behind me, my brother started laughing. Lenora caught me at the eastern gate. I have never seen her move like that. She came across that yard with her coat half on and no gloves, and I understood distantly that Lenora Vale's hands are quite small, which is not the point, but it's what I noticed. "You're leaving," she said. "Yes, on the 6th. Her voice went to pieces and she let it. 13 loops, and this is the one where she lets it. "You're leaving on the 6th because he took a 70-year-old man, and you're doing it now, and you didn't tell me. And tomorrow I stand in that hall as guarantor with no one to guarantee. Lenora, and he wins. He wins by using a nice old man. That's how it ends. 12 years, and it ends because Killian Dusk found the one. Lenora," I said. "Read what I signed." She stopped. "Read it," I said. "You've had 12 years in this world, and you've never read the Dusk Charter. Because nobody reads the charter, because the man who wrote it was tired, and it's 12 pages long and there's no story in it. What did you sign?" "I renounced the wardship," I said. "All claims, all protections, all obligations. That's..." And I watched her get there. I watched Lenora Vale, who has counted 12 loops of this house, arrive at clause 1 of a document I wrote on a Sunday for verisimilitude. "The House Court," she said slowly, "sits over members of the House. Clause 1, I said. "Jurisdiction of the household court extends to members of the household. Wards, blood, staff under indenture. And you're not. As of 11 o'clock tonight, with 4 witnesses and an hour recorded, I am not a member of House Dusk," I said. "I'm nobody. I'm a man standing in a yard. Then tomorrow they can't try me," I said. "There's no ledger entry to strike, because you can't strike a name that isn't in the ledger. There's no wardship to remove, because I removed it." The 7th day was going to be a family matter with the doors shut and a cloak on the table. I looked back at the house, but Killian didn't want a family matter, I said. He wanted a show. He moved it himself. An open hearing, before all 5 houses, doors open, everyone watching. He did that. On day 4, because he wanted the Eastern Circle to see the ward crawl. Lenora put her hand over her mouth. "An open hearing before the houses isn't a house court," she said. "No," I said. "It's a hearing, and a hearing has to hear people." Soren. "He built me a room," I said. 5 houses, doors open. On the record. Everyone in the Eastern Circle sitting down at once. Nobody able to walk out without it being a story. 12 times you tried to get me an audience." I shrugged. "He built one himself, because he wanted to enjoy it." Lenora Vale stood in that yard with no gloves on and did some arithmetic of her own, and I watched 12 years go across her face in about 4 seconds. "Say it plainly," she said. "I've had 12 of these, and I've never once had good news. So say it plainly and slowly." "Tomorrow evening," I said, "an open hearing sits before all 5 houses. Killian Dusk intends to accuse a man who is not a member of his household, who holds no ward's obligation, who cannot be struck from a ledger he isn't in, using a seal that is in a box under clause 14 until the hour before. Guaranteed by a house whose standing he personally destroyed with a knife on the 11th. I counted them off. That's 4 separate things he can't do. He's going to do all 4 in front of everybody out loud, in the order he wrote on a sheet of paper this afternoon. Because he thinks he's finished you. Because a woman told him so, and he checked it against nothing. Because nobody in this world ever checks anything." I looked up at the lit windows. "He's about to read out his own confession and call it a verdict." She didn't cheer. "She's had 12 of these. What she did was worse. She came the last 2 steps and put her hand flat on my chest, right over the sternum. The way you check whether a thing is real. 12 times, she said. I have stood in a yard on the 6th night. 12 times, I know. You're not going to be dead by morning. No. Say it properly. Lenora Vale, I said, tomorrow night I'm going to be standing in a hall with 5 houses in it, and I'm going to be extremely annoying. She laughed, in the dark, in a yard, on the 6th night, 13th time round. Then she took her hand back and became a Vale again in the space of one breath, which is a trick I'd pay money to learn. I'll be there at 7, she said, as guarantor of House Vale. You know what he does when you stand. I know. He opens the registry. I'm counting on it, Lenora said, and walked out of the yard. They released Bard at midnight. Of course they did. The leverage was gone. You can't trade a quarry sentence for a departure that's already happened. There was nothing left to buy, and Killian isn't cruel for free. He's cruel for a reason, which is somehow worse. The old man came out with his lens in his pocket and his coat over his arm, and he looked at me, standing there in the dark with no house, no name, no ledger, no roof. You've gone and made yourself nothing, Bart said. Yes, he'll say you're nothing tomorrow, in front of all of them. I know. And what'll you say? I looked up at the house. Every window lit. Somewhere in there, my brother was practicing a speech he'd written on a page he got from a woman who got it from me. He thinks tomorrow he crosses out my name, I said. And tomorrow I read aloud. The seventh evening they filled the hall. 5 houses. Dusk, Vale, Morton, Balan, Iskra, every lord, every heir, every advisor, every clerk who could invent a reason to stand at the back. The doors open, because Killian had insisted the doors stay open. The great table across the top. And on the table, laid out on a cloth like a relic, one gray cloak with a silver clasp. There was a betting book going round the back rows. An actual book. Half the Eastern Circle had money on the ward crawling to a Vale girl before midnight, and the odds had been shifting all afternoon, and men who had never once said my name were arguing about my character with numbers. I came in at 7 with nothing. No house, no title, no ledger entry, no wardship, no cloak, no coat worth the word. Bart at the back wall with his lens in his top pocket, Trask by the side door with a box under his arm, because Trask goes where the paperwork goes. Lord Hald Dusk sat at the middle of the table, doing arithmetic behind his beard, and Killian stood up, and he was magnificent. I want to give him that. 6 days of losing had burned everything soft off him, and what was left was very clean and very handsome and completely empty, and when he spoke the whole hall leaned in. It gives me no pleasure to stand here, he said. Third version. He picked well. He did the accusation properly. The debt closed, yes, but closed with 1,100 silver that a ward could not possibly have. The cloak his own, taken from his room, sold in the Eastern Quarter for 400, and here is the dealer, and the dealer will say so. The pattern, the ingratitude. The years of bread this house had put in front of a boy who repaid it with theft. The dealer said so. He was a nervous little man, and he'd clearly been paid twice, once to remember, and once to be nervous about it. I ask the houses, Killian said, to strike the name Soren Kai from the ledger of House Dusk, and to put him out the eastern gate, and to record that it was done for cause. And the hall turned to me. I said nothing, not a word. I stood there in a room with 5 houses in it and let a man call me a thief and gave him absolutely nothing back. And the silence went on long enough to get uncomfortable, and then long enough to get interesting, and the back rows started to murmur because a man who won't answer is either finished or dangerous and nobody could tell which. Bets moved. I could hear paper. Hald's arithmetic reached its conclusion. He looked out the window, and Lenora Vale stood up. Before the houses proceed, she said, House Vale has a matter. The hall went absolutely still, because everyone in it had money riding on the exact matter she was about to raise. 7 days ago, in the Hall of Names, I wagered before you all that the ward Soren Kai would come to me and beg for his name back. She let it sit. He didn't. House Vale forfeits. You've never heard a room do what that room did. She kept going, flat over the noise, the way you read a weight. House Vale pays out in full tonight, to every book in the circle. Every stake, every side wager, every lodge, and every dowry some idiot put on a boy he'd never spoken to. Her chin came up half an inch. I lost. Write it down, now. Understand what she did there. She could have waited. If they struck me out in 10 minutes, she'd have won her bet in the most public way possible. The ward broken, the ledger closed, House Vale's honor paid back with interest, and a whole season of the Eastern Circle owing her money. She forfeited 11 minutes before it would have paid. She stood in front of 5 houses and took the loss with her family's name on it, and her father in the 3rd row going the color of a man watching his water rights walk out the door. Lady Vale, Killian said, and he almost got the warmth back. There's no need. The matter's not settled. You may find I've settled it, Lenora said. Proceed. Internal note for the record. In a hall with 5 houses in it, I have never wanted to be a better character in my life. Killian proceeded. Of course he did. He'd have proceeded through a fire. Then let the houses vote, he said. By the charter, a striking from the ledger requires the seal of the house and a guarantor of the second blood. And Trask at the side door said, the seal is in a box. The hall turned. Trask does not raise his voice. Trask has never raised his voice. Trask stepped forward with the box under his arm and put it on the table and said in the tone of a man reading a delivery note, a challenge of authenticity was lodged under Clause 14 on the 5th day. The impression on the seal is countersigned by an endorsement Lord Morton withdrew in writing. Register and wax do not match. The seal is suspended for 3 days pending sight of the countersigned register. He set his hand on the box. It comes out on the 8th. It is currently the 7th. Somebody in the Balan row laughed and turned it into a cough. Killian didn't blink. Then House Dusk proceeds on the guarantor alone, as Clause 15 allows, with a House of the Circle standing behind the entry. House Vale stands guarantor, Lenora said. And there it was. Killian smiled. I'd love to tell you my heart didn't do anything. My heart did something, because he'd been carrying this since the 11th, and I'd seen the cut with my own eyes. And it's one thing to know a trap is set, and another to watch a man walk to the table and set his hand on the lever. Lady Vale cannot stand, Killian said. Noise. Clause 15, he said, over it, lifting his voice for the first time all evening. A house standing guarantor at a hearing must be represented by a registered heir of the blood, whose entry stands in the Registry of Record. The Registry of Record for the Eastern Circle is held in the archive of House Dusk. He turned and gestured, and a clerk came forward with the Vale Registry, and Killian opened it on the table in front of 5 houses, and turned it round so the front rows could see. There is no entry for Lenora Vale, he said. The hall came apart. Lord Vale was on his feet. Iskra was shouting. 2 clerks were trying to get to the book at once. Somebody in the back yelled something about the Vale marriages and got shouted down and yelled it again. And Lenora stood there in the middle of it, with her hands at her sides, letting them look, taking it, exactly like a woman who has been cut out of things her whole life and has decided to make this one count. I let it run for about 15 seconds. Then I said, from the floor, in a voice that got the whole room because it was the first thing I'd said all night, "How do you know?" It went quiet the way a kitchen goes quiet when something drops. Killian looked at me. What? How do you know there's no entry? And there, right there. Half a beat. The first crack in 6 days of a beautiful face. The clerk, which clerk? The registry is checked by whom and when. I walked up the middle of the hall, and nobody stopped me, because nobody in that room had worked out yet whether I was a ward, a thief, or a man off the street. Trask, in your life, has anyone ever ordered a check of the Registry of Record? No, Trask said. Bart, in 40 years. Has anyone ever read that registry? Read from it, Bart said. Never checked it. It's the record. You check things against it. So, I stopped at the table. That book has sat in a stone room in the 4th aisle for 300 years, and no living person has ever looked at Lenora Vale's page. I turned to Killian. Then how do you know it's not there? Silence. You knew before you opened it, I said. You walked in here tonight with that card up your sleeve. You had it in the order. You wrote the order out on a sheet of paper yesterday afternoon. The accusation, the dealer, the cloak, the ledger, and then underlined at the bottom, the registry gap and the Vale girl. I let that land because a man's own handwriting is a wonderful thing. You knew a page was missing from a book nobody has ever read. There's exactly one way to know that. He didn't move. Say it, I said. This is Bart, I said. The archive entry book. Who signs to go down into the lower stacks? Bart came forward with it. The old man, 61 years old, passed 2 of Killian's men who suddenly had no instructions, and he opened it on the table beside the cut registry. He read out in a dry archivist's voice, Killian Dusk, the 9th page turn. Killian Dusk, the 11th. The 11th, I said. And I put the contract on the table. House Dusk instrument of appointment, I said. Land registrar for the Eastern Holdings. Offered to me, in a laundry passage by my brother at 10 at night on the 4th day, with his own lamp because he didn't want a footman in the corridor. I opened it to the top. Clause 2, read by his own hand. Trask read it. He read it out, because Trask reads things out. That's what Trask is. I, Killian Dusk, holder of the seal of House Dusk since the 11th, being empowered to bind the house in all matters of appointment. He stopped. Since the 11th, Trask repeated. You could hear the hall's brain working. 5 houses doing the same arithmetic at once, and for once in his life Lord Hall Dusk wasn't the fastest man in the room. The theft of the seal, I said. The theft I am accused of tonight. In this room, on this cloth, next to that cloak, is dated the 14th. Nothing, nobody breathing. So on the 11th, I said, 3 days before the seal was stolen, my brother went down into the archive alone, and he came up holding the seal of House Dusk, and he wrote it down in his own hand and signed it. And then he sat in a stone room for 20 minutes with a lamp and a straight edge and cut. A woman he had never spoken to out of the Registry of Record, in case he needed her not to exist. I looked at the front rows. Every one of you watched him open that book tonight and tell you her page was missing, I said. He's the only man alive who could have known. He's just testified to his own hand on the blade and his own hand on the seal out loud in front of 5 houses, because he wrote it on a sheet of paper and rehearsed it 3 times at a wall. The hall detonated. Real noise. Lord Vale coming over a bench. Iskra roaring. Balan sitting very still with his hands folded, which for Balan is a scream. The clerks scattering, the back rows shoving to see the book, someone shouting for the entry ledger, someone else shouting for the dealer, who had discovered a pressing need to be somewhere else and was being held by his collar by a footman with a grudge. Killian Dusk stood in the middle of it, and I watched his face go the exact gray of the ledger paper in front of him, that flat, printed no ink left gray, man matching the document he'd forged. And then Mia Rose sank herself. I'd like to say I planned it. I didn't. I don't have to. It's what she is, and I made her that way, and it took her about 11 seconds. She stood up in the second row and said, into a hall of 5 houses, "He made me do it." Killian turned his head very slowly. "I told him about the registry, but he made me," Mia said, and the tears were there. They're always there. They arrive like staff. He asked which page, and I told him, but I didn't know what he meant to do with it. And the pages he had me carry, I only carried them. I never read them. "Which pages?" Iskra said. He had me carry things from the archive, all season." "Which pages, girl?" And Mia Rowe looked around a hall of 5 noble houses and understood. About 4 sentences too late. She had just told the Eastern Circle she'd been running material out of a locked archive for a man who cuts women out of books. She'd sold him to save herself and put herself in the frame doing it. In 11 seconds, in front of everyone. That's the trick I gave her in Chapter 12, and it works on people who are already in love with her, and there was not one person in that hall in love with her anymore. 2 of Iskra's men were on their feet. Killian didn't even look at her. That's what I want on the record. She burned her entire life for him in front of 5 houses, and he didn't turn his head. And I know what was going on behind that gray face because I built it, and because a man's inner voice doesn't stop just because his mouth has. He wasn't thinking about the seal. He wasn't thinking about the blade or the registry or the 11th or the quarry or his father. He was thinking, I was the one they looked at. 9 years old, brought in from nothing, and by 10 he'd worked out the whole machine. That a room has one lit place in it and everything else is furniture, and that if you are kind where people can see you, the light follows you around for free. 6 years of standing next to a ward who made him brighter. 6 years of a dark corner that never once asked for anything. I gave him bread. I put my own cloak on him, in front of the staff. And under it, quieter, the thing he'd never once said out loud in 400 pages. He never thanked me properly. Not once. Not the way they do. That's my hero. That's the whole engine. It was never the land. It was never the ledger. He wanted to be the only lit thing in the room, and on the 7th evening he got the biggest room in the Eastern Circle. Doors open, 5 houses in it, everyone watching. And he'd built it himself, and every eye in it was on a man with no coat. Then Lord Hall Dusk spoke for the first time all evening. You, he said to me, you're not of this house. You renounced at 11 o'clock last night, 4 witnesses, an hour recorded. You have no ward standing, no blood, no ledger entry, no wardship, nothing. His arithmetic had arrived, and it had arrived at the only question left. So who are you in this hall to speak at all? And there it was. The question I'd been waiting for since 11 o'clock last night. I'd like to describe the feeling, but the honest version is that I was so frightened my hands had gone cold, and the small man in my head had left the building entirely. And what was standing at that table was a very tired writer with a very long week behind him. Bart, I said. The other book, the hall watched an old archivist walk the length of it with a lamp and a stand, and one book that had never in 300 years been in a room with people in it. He set it on the table. Lord Villainess stood up. Just stood, without meaning to. Iskra's shouting stopped mid-word. Somewhere at the back a clerk said, "That's not," and then stopped, because it was. "The Chronicle," Bilan said. "The Chronicle," I agreed, because here's what that book is, for those of you keeping score at home. Every house in this circle proves itself out of it. Blood, land, title, precedence, the right to hold a seal, the right to sit at a hearing with the doors open. Every registry in every house is a copy of an entry in that book. When 2 lords fight over a river, they don't fight. They go and have the archivist read to them. It's the deed under the world. Lord Hald asked who I am, I said, and I opened it. Balan, I said. 3rd entry, 2nd column. Your family holds the Western Terraces because of one sentence. Would you like to hear it? And to Balan, the low water and the terraces above it for the keeping of the road. 21 words. Everything your houses stands on 21 words and a comma. And the comma matters, because without it, the road belongs to Iskra. Balan sat down, hard. Iskra, I said. 4th entry. Your precedence over Morton isn't blood, it's alphabetical. The founder wrote the list in one evening and never came back to it, and your grandfather went to war over a list somebody made because it looked better that way. Iskra's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Morton, I said. You've got a son who isn't yours. It's not in this book, but it's in your registry in 3 places if anyone ever reads it. And the dates don't work, and I'd suggest you never let anyone check the registry of record, which happily for you is a thing nobody has ever done. I looked up. Until tonight. Morton went the color of a boiled prawn and stayed there. The fire in the South Quarter, 11 years ago, I said. 60 houses. They never found who ordered it. There are 2 men in this hall who know, and one of them has been paying the other one every spring since, through a wine account. And it's in the ledgers under Bell and Reds. And I'm not going to say the names tonight because I don't need to. Nobody said a word. Nobody in that hall said one word. Do you understand what happened in that room? It wasn't that I knew their secrets. Half the Eastern Circle knows the Eastern Circle's secrets. It's that I stood in front of 5 houses and put my hand on the book they check things against and told them what was in it before I opened the page. I'd stopped being a ward, I'd stopped being a thief. I'd become a thing they'd have to answer. And Killian, beautiful, empty, finished Killian, with the gray still on him, did the only thing he had left. He's inventing it, he said. He's read the archive and he's inventing the rest. Any man could stand there and say words. Fair. Honestly, fair. That's what I'd have written for him. All right, I said. Come and write in it. The hall went quiet again. It's the Chronicle, I said. It's the record. It's the thing that decides what's true, and you've been telling this hall all night what's true, so come and add a line, 1 line. Anything you like? Write Soren Kai is a thief, and it'll be in the book, and I'll take the Eastern Gate at a run. Killian stood there. Come on, I said. You cut a page out of it once, adding one should be easy, and he came. Because 5 houses were watching and he could not come. Bart gave him the pen. Killian looked at me and he wrote, good hand, confident, that beautiful confident hand that had signed a contract in a laundry passage. Soren Kai is a thief. Right across the 4th entry. The ink beaded up. It didn't smudge, it didn't run. It gathered, the way water does on wax, and sat there in fat black drops on top of the parchment. And every letter he had written pulled itself apart into beads and slid, and the page underneath was clean. He wrote it again. Pressing, beads. He wrote it a 3rd time, and his hand was shaking now, and the beads ran off the edge of the page and made a small black pool on the table of the great hall of House Dusk. And Killian Dusk stood there with a wet pen and a clean page in front of 5 houses, and everyone in that room watching a book refuse him. I took the pen out of his hand. I wrote 1 line, in the margin of the 4th entry, in a hand that has been in that book since before anybody's grandfather, Bart of the lower stacks, archivist of the household, free of debt, entered by his name. The ink went in like it had been waiting. You could hear it. That's the mad part. In a hall that size, with 100 people in it, you could hear the pen. Nobody moved for a long moment. Then Lord Balin of the Western Terraces got up out of his seat and bowed to a man with no house, no title, and no coat. Hall Dusk did his arithmetic one last time. I'll give him this. He's fast when it counts. He didn't defend his son. He didn't ask a question. He stood up in front of the 5 houses and said, the name Killian is struck from the ledger of House Dusk, and sat down again, because if the boy's hand was on that blade, then every deed, every claim, every water right in the Dusk holdings had a man with a knife standing next to it, and the only way to save the house was to cut the piece with the knife in it off and hold it up so everyone could see it go. Killian didn't have a name by 10 o'clock. Mia Rowe didn't have a house by 1/2 past. Iskra saw to it personally. House Iskra doesn't shout when it does the real thing. She stayed in the Eastern Circle. That's the part that gets me. She could have gone. She stayed, and by winter she was carrying trays in that same hall, in the same room where she'd sat in the 2nd row. And the people at the tables didn't even do her the courtesy of pretending to remember. And the betting book paid out at 11, and it paid out against House Vale in full, because Lenora Vale had stood up and forfeited 11 minutes before she'd have won. Her father caught her in the side passage while the hall was still roaring. I was 6 feet away. He didn't care that I was 6 feet away, which tells you what he thinks of the men his daughter stands next to. Do you know what that cost? Lord Vale said. To the silver, Lenora said. The lodge, the Billan stakes. Half the season's book. Every man in that hall walks out tonight with Vale money in his coat and a story about a Vale girl who couldn't hold a wager for 7 days. 6, she said. I lost it on the 2nd. He stared at her. You could have waited 11 minutes. He said it like a man in genuine pain, and I think he was. 11 minutes and the boy was struck out and you'd have won it in front of all of them. 11 minutes, Lenora. Yes, she said. Why? And Lenora Vale, who has been cut out of a registry, a book and a week of dinners, looked at her father and said, because I wanted the room to hear me lose it while I still had a choice about it. He didn't understand. He's never going to understand. There's no version of Lord Vale that gets there. He stood in that passage doing sums with his mouth open while his daughter walked away. And by the time he'd finished them, the Eastern Circle had already started telling the other story. The one where a Vale stood up in front of 5 houses and paid in full on the night with her name on it, when nobody could have made her. By spring, that was worth more than the lodge. Say what you like about the Eastern Circle. They're not sentimental, but they can smell a bill that gets paid. It rained after. Of course it rained. I wrote the weather in this world, and I gave the Eastern Quarter a wet autumn because it was atmospheric. And now I have to live in it. He was at the Eastern Gate. No name, no house, no cloak. His cloak was on a table inside, on a cloth, being catalogued as evidence by a clerk who kept giggling. Killian dusk in the rain at the gate of the estate. He'd been running 6 days earlier, and he'd been standing there a while because he'd had nowhere to be for the first time in his life. Soren, I stopped. I didn't have to. That's the thing. I had absolutely no reason to stop, and I did because I wanted to hear it, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. I'm not asking for the ledger, he said. His voice had gone. 6 days ago, that voice could make a stable boy sigh. I'm not asking for the land or the seat or the house. I know what I did. Do you? I want the name. He said it fast, like a man getting a splinter out. Dusk, just the name. Nothing attached to it. I'll leave the circle tonight. I'll never come back. But a man with no name can't take work. He can't hold a room. He can't. Soren, you write in the book. One line, and I'm a person again. Rain. You had me for 6 years, he said. I put a cloak on you in front of the staff. Do you remember? I remember. I gave it to you. You lent it to a table, I said. You were always going to want it back. And here's the thing I want you to understand, because it's the only thing in this whole week I'm actually proud of. And it's not the chronicle, and it's not the contract, and it's not the pen. I didn't feel anything. I stood in the rain and looked at the most beautiful character I ever wrote. 600 comments. Chapter 12. The jawline, kneeling in the mud of a gate he used to own, asking me for 4 letters, and I checked, honestly checked, for the thing I'd been expecting to feel all week. Nothing there. He wasn't a villain. He wasn't a brother. He was a page I'd written badly at 2 in the morning because I was hungry and I wanted to finish. Soren, please. I walked past him, that's all. I didn't say a line. I've spent this whole story telling you what I said to people, and at the one moment where the audience wanted the speech, I found I didn't have one, and I walked out the eastern gate of House Dusk in the rain with my hands in my pockets, and behind me my brother started saying my name over and over. And it got quieter, then it was just the rain. Bart got the first line in the new registry. His own name, written by the hand that wrote the chronicle, at the top of the page, above the blood. Trask filed it, and then held onto the desk for a second, because Trask has never in his life filed something that couldn't be challenged. And I think it was the happiest moment of the man's career. The old man cried about it, then got embarrassed, then told me my letters were sloppy. They're not. They're just tired. Oh, and I went down to the cold store on the way out. I don't know why. Yes, I do. 12 marks on the inside of the door, fresh at sitting height, in a room nobody had entered in a year, cut with something small and hard by, somebody with a lot of time, and a very good reason to keep count. I stood there with a lamp and looked at them for a while. Then I found the nail she'd used. It was still there on the ledge, because she'd left it for herself, 13 times, and I did not cut a 13th mark. I scratched a line through all 12 instead. Midnight came and it was the 8th. I want to tell you what that was like, and I can't, because I've written 47 people and none of them have a line for it. Lenora Vale stood in the empty hall with the rain going on outside, and the bell went, and she didn't move for a long time. 12 times she'd got to this hour and been somewhere else, in a garden, in a corridor, in a yard, counting, with a nail in her pocket. It's the 8th, she said. It's the 8th. There's no 8th. Her voice did the crack. Soren, there's no 8th. I've never seen an 8th. I don't know what's in it. Nobody does, I said. That's what the 8th is. The hall was empty by then. Cloth on the table, black pool of ink dried into the wood where the book had refused him, and the smell of 100 people who've just watched something they'll be lying about for 30 years. She put her hand in her pocket and took out a piece of paper and held it out to me. Her page, the one out of the registry, she'd taken it off the table while the hall was coming apart, and nobody had noticed, because nobody ever notices her, which is the entire problem with this world and with the book about it. I looked at it. Lenora Vale, daughter of the blood, House Vale, cut clean along the gutter. And underneath, where the entry ran on, a line struck through it. One clean stroke of ink, drawn by a hand I know better than my own face. Because it is my own hand. From the appendix. From the night with the cereal. From the past where I'd tidied the founding families and decided this one didn't need a story. That's what an editorial cut looks like from the inside. Rewrite me, she said. Rain on the roof. You've got the pen, Lenora said. Book takes your hand and no one else's, and my page is right here. And you can put me back in and write it properly this time. The 14 pages, the letters at the long table, all of it. Put me in the record where they can't cut me out, and I'll be in the book, And I'll be, real? I said. Yes, I took the page out of her hand, and I tore it in half. She went absolutely white. No, I said. I tore it again, quarters. Then I let go, and it went on the floor of the great hall of House Dusk, with the ink pool and the rain outside. No, I said, because I'd write you kind, Lenora, or brave, or tragic. God, I'd write you tragic. I'd write you 14 beautiful pages, and my editor would leave them in this time, and you'd be the best thing in the book, and every word of it would be mine. I put my hands out empty. You've had a page your whole life. Your mother wrote it. Killian cut it. I struck it through at 2 in the morning, eating cereal because you slowed the pacing down. Soren, you're not in the script anymore, I said. There isn't one. I burned it. Chapter 6 on day 2, Chapter 8 on day 3, Chapter 7 on the 5th, and everything after that went with it. There's no 7th day. There's no ending. Nobody knows what's in the 8th, including me, and that's the first honest thing this world has had since the founder. She looked at the paper on the floor. Then what am I? A woman standing in a hall, I said. Same as me. Nobody's got either of us. And Lenora Vale, 13 loops, 12 tally marks, 1 nail, 4 days of a bet she lost on purpose in front of 5 houses, started laughing. And it was the ugly one, the snort, the undignified one, and she put her hand over her mouth like she'd dropped something expensive. Then she took it away again. Empty hall, gray light in the high windows, torn paper on the floor between us and the rain letting up outside. She held out her hand, and it was small, and it was bare, and it was shaking. I took it.